racing is a non-stop subject. I mean, cars and racing are that's something that happens day in, day out, regardless. Like, it comes to a point where mum and I think my sister just don't bother anymore. There's just like, it goes into one ear and out the other, because they don't even want to tell us to stop talking about it. Like, it's just part of the family at this point. But cars and racing, that's a non-stop subject every day.
I was involved in competitive sport probably till about 8 or 10 years ago. And then around the year 2000, I became president of the Ceylon Motor Sports Club, which is the club in Sri Lanka that is affiliated with the FIA, which is the world governing body for motorsport. So I took about 2 or 3 years out of the sport in terms of competing and got much more involved in the organization of sport. It meant sport in the country and even attending meetings and events overseas. However, I felt I was missing out. I wasn't quite ready to hang my boots up. So I got back into the sport again. And this time it was a little different. And what I did, particularly bringing me more up to date in the last few years, was to say I really wanted to compete at the highest end of the sport in the country. I had not done that up to then. I had been maybe a rung or two lower. So I was racing 1600cc cars, 2-litre cars, but I was not racing the what we call supercars here, the 3.5-litre cars. So I thought, this is the one piece I haven't done as yet. So I thought it'd be fun to have a go at it. So I got into this game about 3 years ago.
Every time when I'm in Australia, I always hear about races going on in Sri Lanka, and I'm like, I really want to be there. That's definite. I always think about it and wish I was there to be there, but just that my studies and priorities, of course, are to finish off with uni first. So that's definitely a yes. I always think about racing, always about being in Sri Lanka when the races are on. And I try to even watch them online while they're going live, because that's the only way I can see what's going on. Even sometimes when it's not live on the internet, I get my mum to actually hold her iPad in front of the TV, which is showing it on Skype through. So that's the measures we go through to sometimes to watch it from overseas. So it's always on my mind.
I'm still learning, and it's all a learning process, and I'm only 16. But I really hope to be in the motorsport the racing unit for a long time, because I really like it, and it's one of my big passions. I mean, I've seen Dad racing from when I was born practically, and I've always loved to watch him, and like getting in the car was an amazing experience, and I'd love to go professional one day and race as large as I can.
We have 2 key days. One is the qualifying day, practice and qualifying, and the other one is a race day. Particularly on the night races, the track is not open to us till the day of the qualifying, so we can't practice on the track at all. So we do take the car to other locations and try it out, but it's only a simulation, because a street track is unique, totally unique. There are no room for error. A race track, you have gravel where you slip off, and you have, even if you make a mistake, you can recover, and at the most you won't do any damage. Unfortunately, on a street track, it's not the same. My expectation was to qualify towards about the middle of the grid normally. In this group, a top 10, we had 22 or 24 entries. For me to qualify in the middle would have been a reasonable place.
At Pandala, the first practice before the night race, we try to get our cars to a level that we feel comfortable with in terms of setup, tire pressure, the suspension settings, the height of the formula. It was pretty much a shakedown of the car too, to see if there were any issues that we could sort out before the race. I was quite happy with the car, so I ran only 3 laps, and I said, look, I don't want to run anymore, the car is fine, I don't want to waste the tires, just put it in, done with practice. Some of the other cars, they will keep running to see if there are problems, to change their height, their suspension, they'll change different tire pressures to see where they're comfortable with. So the first day I met you, actually, it was, I think, I ran first, 1, 2, 3 laps. I was happy with the car, parked it, said, okay, let's get ready for the race instead.
Firstly, that track was dry. It was a very aggressive sort of task. So the car was fairly, I would say, it did handle pretty, like, it was very sturdy on the track, in my experience, compared to sliding all over the place in the track in Colombo. But for me, it was all about getting used to the car rather than speeding my way through and making the best timings. At that time, it was the day after I landed, so I literally landed, slept, and went to the airport, to the track. And that was basically so that I could familiarize myself with the car so that I can sort of place myself well in the race, which is what happened. I mean, eventually I ended up only getting 6 laps because we tried to spare the tires for the race because it was the same set of tires. So it was either I had a few extra laps of practice and less tires, or more tires and less practice. So it was a call I had to make. So 6 laps it was, that's all I had, which in my mind was not enough. So at the races, I was very nervous at qualifying, and that's why I said I was very, very surprised to see myself come 3rd in the qualifying on the grid, because from the practice I had, I was not expecting to be in. Realistically, I was hoping to be in the top 10.
There's rarely a race goes by that something doesn't go wrong sometime in the car. The biggest problems we normally have are heating related, particularly in Sri Lanka. So things that overheat, 2 things overheat: the engine can overheat and the brakes can overheat. Those are 2 things that go wrong. When we're driving the car, we have to be mindful. So I'm watching the gauges that will tell me if the engine is overheating. And I can tell from the pressure on the brake whether the brakes are going to overheat. The problem with the brake overheating is if your brakes overheat, they just go. You suddenly lose your brakes. And that is pretty scary when you come to a junction, to a turn-off point, and you hit the brakes and there are no brakes. I had a challenge in the run-up to the race where the power of the car was slightly down. The reason for this is because for the Colombo street race, we have to use a restrictor to control the speed of the car. And unfortunately, when they set my car up with a restrictor, which was done uniquely, they couldn't get the power to where it needed to be. I was at about 85 to 90% of power. So we went into the qualifying day knowing there was a problem. In fact, 10 hours before the qualifying, we were debating whether to run at all. Race day started from 14th. Sat in the car and watched the lights go to red, and things went wrong immediately, all over the place. Went wrong for me, went wrong around outside the car. For me, the problem was there is a setting on the car that we use only to launch the car. It's called anti-lag, and it gives me a little bit of extra power off the start line. I used that setting, and for some reason, with the restrictor set up, it failed. And what happened is the car started and slowed. I realized immediately what the problem was, and I quickly switched off the anti-lag setting. And what happened in that time was that another couple of cars whizzed past us. And there was a red car, and he tried to shoot past, and he actually clipped another car and went cascading straight in front of my car into the barriers, right across my face. So we restarted the race, and actually the restart for me went very well. I was really happy. I knew there was a fault on the anti-lag, so I didn't use it. And what I did was I stuck to the left side of the track because it's a left-hand bend, the first one. And those guys went wide. They drifted wide with their speed, and I was able to nip through on the inside. So I had, and then ahead of me there was another couple of cars that had some light collision, and they were a bit unstable. I used that opportunity. So it was more being opportunistic rather than by plan. So I managed to pick up on the mistakes of others. There is no room when you're running a race to relax and sit back and think everything is going fine. It just doesn't happen. The concentration that you have to put in for every second of the run is just immense. At one point I lost a bit of concentration. It was a wet day, and we were having to keep the cars on the dry section of the track. Otherwise, if you slip, the car tires have no tread. They're what we call slicks. And unfortunately, at one point I just lost my concentration. I allowed the car to slip onto the wet ground. Went around a sharp bend, left-hander, and I spun the car. I came to a standstill. I was able to swing it around and carry on without having any serious damage, and without hitting another car. One car went past me. So with that, I dropped from 7th to 8th place. Picked up, and funnily enough, the fault that had been there before seemed to have fixed itself with that little incident. So I was better on the pace, but I was a long way behind the guy who was in 7th place at that point. And then close towards the end of the race, one of the cars in front of us had an accident. So he dropped out, and that gave me a finish in 7th.
Got everyone.
Got everybody out. They did a funny thing, he sort of pushed me right to the end and then he came off, so I could have easily kept going at that point. The thing is, if you ease off, you're going to go straight into it. So I thought I'd just keep the foot down and crank and keep it moving.
Going the other way?
At that point it was just full. Actually I was coming to that too fast and I was struggling to find the right turn. So for me, at the end of the day, having worried whether I could even run the race because of a power issue, having qualified 14th and coming 7th eventually, with a group of the guys who are the best at it in the country, with the limited time and effort I put into it, I was very happy.
We knew that the track was slightly slippery, and we had to pretty much gauge, because we've never run the tires that we had on the cars on a wet surface before. The Formula 4 EFIs, the semi-slicks, we hadn't run before. So it was one of those tricky situations where we had to decide, okay, look, do we push the car to its limit, or do we maintain a good pace? But ultimately, I think the track cleared up enough for us to get a really quick time. I was very comfortable with the car, very, very, very comfortable. I mean, I knew I was running it quick because at Pannala that day my times were quite fast on practice. So I knew that as long as I didn't make a mistake and I got it ahead of the others and had a nice amount of space, that I could actually set quite a good time. And I was working really hard for the year for the race. I mean, from losing weight to getting any advantage I could. And I think ultimately did pay off big time at the night race. I mean, to be on pole was something I wanted so bad. So once I managed to do it, I mean, I was surprised, but at the same time I had a feeling that, look, if I had no mistakes, I would be up there. I knew I would be 1, 2 or 3, but to be pole was just, that was a surprise.
I qualified third, which was, I was happy, I was very happy with it. I would have, obviously, first, second would have been obviously better, but third was amazing since I had just literally come in and I got in the car and basically raced when I was racing with guys who've been racing for the whole year and were a lot more used to the cars and how they handle. So it was a very, I was very happy. And in terms of elaborating on advice from my dad, well, he did say it's raining, so be a bit more cautious than you would normally. And when the adrenaline and everything kicked in and I saw the cars take off in front of me, I had to keep up with them.
Me and Viren, to my right, who was sponsored by Amante, we went into the corner a bit too fast in all technicality. He got me off on second gear. He was in front of me, and he went wide, and I decided to stay wide with him instead of cutting in. I mean, taking the inside line, and he ultimately hit a patch of water and he slid. And when I saw him slide in front of me, I panicked. I braked hard. I went to the same slide. Viren went into the tires. I managed to hold up and just stop in front of the tires. But Yannick, who was behind us, saw both of us spin. He panicked and he did a 180-degree turn right in front of me.
Basically, I spun to the point where I saw every other car go past. So I was right at the back. So I had 16 cars go past me, or 17 cars go past me. So, and by the time I got my car, I found it really hard to turn it because it was just, like with the rain, it was just not turning. It was understeering and I'd turn and it would just keep going straight. So I took a long time to turn the car eventually. And by the time I was back on the track, there was no one in front of me.
I'm very fortunate that I missed that accident because I was very close to the cars ahead. But it was great, and just the fact that it was a wet race, it was very dangerous, and it was, you didn't know whether to go faster or slower, and it was a great experience. So about 4 to 5 laps into the race, I was coming down the back straight, down the Golfway straight, and I was braking this is on the race day. I was braking and I tried to turn, but I think I hit a spot of water, so the car aquaplaned and it didn't turn, so I lost steering and I clipped the sandbags, and that ended my race, unfortunately.
By the end of the Golfway, the first side of the Golfway stretch, I had caught up with the pack and I started to make my way through the group, which was tough because it was a big pack of people together. So at that time, yes, my only thought at that time was to try and make my way through and get back into the area where all the good competition was, So that was my strategy at the time, just to get through as many cars as I could, as quickly as I could, because it was a short race. I only had 10 laps.
So then it was all about getting back into first gear, getting across Yannick, and I was in 9th. I was back into 9th, and that was a fight from there. So I had to fight my way up, and I finished 4th. I mean, it's good, but when you start in first, it was our race to lose pretty much.
I spoke with Yannick and Andrew before the race, and I cautioned them, because one of the problems they had was that, unlike when we ran later on, a little later on, the track was quite dry. The track was very wet. And these cars, the good news is they were using proper road tires, which meant that although they don't give you the best traction, in a wet situation, they give you good traction. Unlike our GT cars, which have slicks, which you just cannot use in the wet at all. So they had wet tires. But at the same time, the race was going to be dictated around those who made mistakes. I said to them, be careful. Firstly, safety is most important than everything. I want all of them to come out of it safe. That was a priority. And whilst there was a piece of me that wanted them to go out there and win, at the same time, as a parent, safety is the most important thing. So I personally went down all 3 cars and checked that they were all belted in properly and so on, so that I knew that they were all secure. And I did give them some suggestions, some strategy, which was basically saying, take it easy for the first 2 laps. Go very easy. Don't try to do anything crazy, because it's going to be very different to what it was in qualifying the day before. The cars would not handle anything like they did on a dry track the previous day. And it was going to be survival of the fittest.
I should have been a bit more cautious, especially during the conditions of the track. It was very slippery. There was puddles of water here and there where the car would actually aquaplane, and you'd feel the back coming out, and trying to keep it straight was a task. And it was very fast. Like qualify stretch, you were flat out. The car was literally, wouldn't rev anymore, so it was at its peak. And it was very slippery, and my conclusion in total was it was an awesome experience, and I definitely have to learn from the mistakes.
So at the end of the day, from on the day standpoint, it was a disappointing day. But from a learning experience standpoint, it was an amazing day. They drove in the wet, the dry. They did well. They drove in the wet. They learnt maybe the hard way that your strategy in one environment is totally different to a different environment. They also learned that sometimes you have to be a little bit patient. I'm sure sitting back, I'm sure reflecting on it, they all feel if we just took it a little bit easier at the beginning, it would have had a much better result in the end. So, and that's something that it's a good learning, that, under the circumstances, watch, plan, strategize, wait, and then make your move at the right time.